Hello, wonderful. Have you ever had an experience with a child who you remember as this bubbly bag of joy as a baby, and then you nurtured them and you enriched them and you showed up for them, and then they turn into a teenager or an older teenager and they become someone you don't recognize anymore. They become someone maybe that you don't want to be around. They become someone who uh, actually are the toxic person in your life. And we hate to think of our kids that way. But when there's violence in the home, when the law's getting involved, when they're obviously going down a destructive path, we can't be honest with ourselves or honest in getting them the help and support they need without recognizing how bad it really is. And that is what Gina Fontaine and I are going to be discussing today. And she is the author of You Are a Supermom and has an extensive amount of experience in this area. Gina, how are you?
I'm well, Sarah. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, thank you for having such an honest conversation about this. It's something I talk privately to mothers about every week. Every week. There's not a week that passes that this isn't first and forefront on their minds. But it's not something people talk about publicly. And I'm reading the book right now, All Joy, No Fun, which is a parenting book. And
Mhm.
they say that most of the mommy blogs are about babies and toddlers because it's a lot easier to complain publicly about your kids not liking peas than it is to say, my kid is violent towards me. My kid is violent towards themselves. My kid is violent towards others. So there's not as many people talking about this as there are people experiencing this. Is that what you understand?
It is. And I'll even say that my own mother was aghast. She couldn't believe that I wrote this book. And her first reaction was, "You just aired all your dirty laundry for the world to read. Do you realize that?" And I said, "Yes, I do realize that because these are conversations that we need to be having in order to literally save lives, because there's mental health challenges that our teenage children especially are experiencing at this time, that not enough we're hearing about the suicides and the suicide prevention, but we're letting it get to that point, and that's what
Mm.
scares me. And then when you do reach out trying to find mental health help, you're put on a wait list. And in my situation, we were escalated when it started to become violent. And it's like, well, why did we have to wait until there was bloodshed to get help? Like, we were moved to the top of the list at that point. And the help needs to be there at the very beginning, when we first start to see things going sideways, before they crash.
Absolutely. And even in the conversation around domestic violence in the courts, it's like, I'll be happy to help you when you get a black eye.
Yep.
I'll be happy to help you when your bone's broken. I definitely think you should get a divorce if someone's hitting you. But it's like, whoa, like that's like, we don't look at cancer and say we're only going to treat you if, it's in stage 4 and you're at the brink of death. Like that's the only
Yep.
time we take cancer seriously. So why don't you tell people a bit about your experience and what your book's about?
Yeah, I mean, I was in a very toxic marriage for 14 years. And I was that woman in court pleading for a restraining order the day I filed for divorce, because I was literally thrown out of my house, suitcase thrown on the lawn, told to get the F out. And and then my instinct, when he then changed the locks, and I went down to the court and applied for the restraining order and the divorce decree on the same day. And again, the judge asked me questions like, did he physically harm you? Did he put his hands on you? And it's like, well, no, but I've endured years of emotional and verbal abuse. And even I'll say, on the child protective services end of things, my oldest son, who became my problem child, he endured years of being the scapegoat, and physical abuse and verbal abuse by his father. And every time we would file a report, whether it was me or a counselor at school, they would just write it off because it wasn't, oh, well, it was just some red marks, or, there was never bloodshed. And you're absolutely right. It's like when it comes to mental health care, we wait until it escalates to the point of even beyond crisis in some points. And that's where I found I had to turn to when I was placed on waiting lists to receive care for my son was, oh, here's the crisis line number. And it was in my speed dial because I would, be in those moments of, I don't know who to talk to and where to turn to, but I'll just call this 1-800 number because I know there'll be somebody calm on the other side to talk to. And it felt very weird. The first time I made that phone call, I was like, where has my life gone and how is this happening to me?
Yeah, which is, kind of in the stages of shock and denial and then bargaining, like, okay, yeah, which is in a toxic relationship. Well, how can I be better so that they are better? Right.
Yeah.
So that bargaining, how can I be better? I had someone recently I know get diagnosed with cancer, and they instantly started bargaining. Well, how could I have been better so God wouldn't have given me cancer? And they were working through that and saying they didn't believe that line of thinking, but that was where their brain went to first,
Yeah.
and it's, you talked about that too. And okay, how could I have been a better mother so this wouldn't have happened? Can you tell people a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, in my marriage dynamic as mother, father, I was the safe place for my kids to go when, dad's temper would erupt. And so it was sort of that wait till your dad gets home kind of household. And I honestly didn't have any boundaries with my kids because I just wanted to be the lover, the nurturer, and everything's okay.
And I want to stop right there. Okay.
Yeah.
Because if we are naturally, in my book, I talked about, I kept wanting to get better at the things I was already good at. So I'm just going to get better at being more forgiving. It's kind of the bargaining with God. I want to be better at being more kind. I want to be better at being more forgiving. I want to be better at not having boundaries. I want to be better at being more loving. I want to be better at showing up for my kids more, when what life was asking from me. And I'm not saying this insulting you. I'm saying I am here with you in this conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Right? To say what life was asking me was to swing to the other side a bit and get better at some of the other aspects of this. And I really, if I may use you as a guinea pig, I'm so sorry, but that's what I hear from mothers. And it's like, well, I'll just be more understanding. I'll be more forgiving. I'll be more looking over behaviors at the start. Does that feel like what happened with you? It's certainly what I've.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it wasn't until years later, like a year ago, I'm still with the same partner, and he began to point out, like, your son is so abusive to you. Do you hear the way he talks to you? And I'm like, oh yeah, but that's just the way he is. And he would not put up with that. And really watching him set strong, healthy boundaries around what was appropriate and not, that's like my weakness that I really want to become my greatest strength, is how to set a healthy boundary. And sometimes that means cutting the people, like our children, out of our lives that we feel like, well, I should have this really great relationship with him and I need to keep pursuing that. But maybe the best thing that I can do, and we're at the conclusion I've drawn since he's on his own now, is that lovingly releasing him to his life lessons and not intervening and just saying, you know what, he's got this and I'm still here, and he knows how to reach me if he needs anything. And I'm not going to be a doormat anymore and endure, the verbal abuse anymore.
And if I may, because I'm quite certain if you've written a book about this, you've gone through your own personal journey, you've gotten help, you've researched, you've done all these things. Has there ever been a situation that you believe is honest, because I know in marriages sometimes people say, oh, if you're just a doormat to your, then you can save your marriage. And it's like, who's that really worked for? Like, I know of a lady who, she was in a very controlling relationship. She tried to kill herself. So then the husband swooped in, like, look, you tried to kill yourself, I can save you. And I think she'd been having an affair because she was just trying to get, like, I'm not excusing an affair, both. And she was in a, she was just out of her thinking and felt out of control. And, it's just a bad situation all around.
Yeah.
So they healed their marriage. They worked it out. They stayed together. Fast forward 10, 15, 20 years. She's not allowed to go to the grocery store by herself. She's not allowed to talk to her children without her husband being on the phone. She's not allowed to pick out her own shoes. Like, it's really hard to look at that. You're not allowed to go to the grocery store by yourself or talk to your children by yourself. But then things fixed and things got better. Like, that's a real hard stretch to say that worked out. Like, a real hard stretch. But I want to say the same thing with our kids. It's like, if we flip it in the kids, it's like, great, you can have a relationship with your kids. You need to pay for them whatever they want. You need to never have any expectations for them. You never have any boundaries for them. You need to let them physically assault you if they want. You need to let them physically assault others in your house and not hold them accountable. Like, is that the answer? Like, it can't be the answer. And does it work?
No, and it doesn't. And I think and I got on board with this, it's not a myth in my book, but it ought to be, is that our role as parents is to make our kids happy and like create this joyous life with Disneyland and great vacations. And that's not our role. We're here to be role models for them we're basically here to raise healthy adults. And that's been a hard lesson for me of, I want to be that parent who I see maybe my youngest son, he was just crying last night and I wanted to swoop in and make it all better. But the best thing that I could do, because he was being disrespectful to me, this just happened last night. It was like, you know what, I'm going to turn off the Wi-Fi and you're going to go to bed and you're going to just be with your emotions. And instead of me saying, oh, let me cuddle. I mean, that's what the old me would have done. Oh, let's cuddle and I'll just, sleep with you for a little bit and everything's going to be okay. But I was doing a disservice to him. He's not a toddler anymore. And he's 11 now, and giving him that emotional intelligence to figure things out on his own and not be in that place of, Mom, you made me angry. You made me sad. No, I'm not going to take that. I'm not going to take that on. You get to have your own emotions. And that's a little hard for an 11-year-old brain to grasp, that no one can make you feel any certain way. It's you deciding, like, I'll let myself feel this, whatever emotion, the game, the guilt, the shame, but then I'm going to, move on and not blame anybody for what I felt. And honestly, that's something that I only came to learn through the breakup of my toxic marriage, that it wasn't even his fault that because it took years. It's been 4 years now, but it took years to get past that place of blaming him. Our kid is like this because of you. And it wasn't until I wrote my book that I started to really dig into what was my role in this. And my role was that I never ever relaxed. I was always stressed out, running around. I'm a fitness instructor, so I'd go from teaching class to class to class, and I'd come home a raging maniac because I just exhausted myself after not sleeping the night before because I had an infant. And it was like this perpetual cycle of mom erupts and everybody, kind of gets scared and goes to their room. And so I had a role. And you talked about the friend or the client who went back into that toxic situations. And the reality is, when we are in constant fight or flight, constant stress, the executive function in our brain shuts down, and that's our decision-making ability. And I made just countless poor decisions. And then I'd kind of throw my hands up in the air and say, how did I get here? Well, I was reacting to life instead of responding to life. And I've been a yoga teacher for 25 years. So you'd think I like have some tools for calming and relaxation, and I do. But again, when it's like a perpetual cycle. And women, do you know how long it takes women to process through stress hormones when we have a situation, a trigger?
72 hours?
It's 24.
Okay.
So,
I'm
yeah.
even worse. No.
Sometimes it feels like 72 hours.
Well, I think that's really important. And I want to kind of split the conversation here, because I know what Gina and I, if you are a parent of a 11-year-old who we're trying to help you prep to make sure this doesn't happen, and you are a parent of a 20-year-old who's looking back with guilt, please know we're talking to two different people in two different versions of this conversation. I know Gina feels the same way, because if it's a tricky place for us, we don't want to get into victim blaming, but there's people here listening with a 6 and a 7 and an 8 and a 9-year-old, and we want to equip them with new information. And then there's people here with a 26, 27, 28, 29-year-old who hasn't spoken to them. And the purpose of this is not, hey, you should have done this better. You should have done, please give grace to us as we have this conversation, that there are people, I want to say that to our listeners, that there are people, you may have the 26-year-olds, and I'm getting real emotional right now. And out of integrity, we want to have this conversation to the person who has the 6-year-old too. So we're not trying to make people with the 26-year-old feel bad, but it's also at the same time we want people with a 6-year-old and 7-year-old and 8-year-old to hear this. Is that the way you understand it, Gina?
Yes. And I certainly don't want to scare people like, oh no, teenage years are coming and bear down, get ready. That it's more of like, look at those situations when they're 6 and 7 years old. The falls and the stumbles are so much smaller than when they're 15. And so equipping yourself with tools, and what I've learned is just keeping myself calm. And I didn't even know how to do that for myself back in those days when I had 3 kids under the age of 10. And I was just ill-equipped. And it was more like, well, if I just keep him happy, because I can remember my oldest son, like just being very defiant. Timeout never worked for him. He would just run away, and he thought it was a game. And I didn't want to pursue it any further because that would have been too hard. And so let's just go play and let's have a game. And I was that mom, like, let's make it better by having fun, instead of confronting the situation and saying, okay, I guess we're not going to go to the zoo or wherever, like we said we were. And I just was like, oh, I don't want to disappoint him. And we'll just, sit here for a minute and then we'll continue on with our day. And the consequences have to be real and hard. And it's so hard we want to see our kids happy. And when we see them sad and upset, it doesn't feel good as a parent to watch our kids go through that.
Well, it doesn't. And in my own life, in my own personal journey, this week in particular, it is that whole idea of hypervigilance as a parent. And my husband and I had a conversation last weekend, and he said, and I felt like my parenting brand is peace. I feel like my kids feel peaceful around me. I have worked it's funny to say I've worked so hard to have peace. But I believe with all my heart that that's the counterbalance. If there is like in your situation, if there's a toxic partner involved, and then you are the place of peace and steadiness and emotional stability and calm, and just like, okay, I've got this. I'm confident. I've never heard of anyone say, my mom was so confident, put together, emotionally stable, non-reactive, and emotionally healthy, and I really need therapy because it messed me up. Like no one
Right.
says that, you know? And again, I'm not putting blame on people who have older kids. Please,
Mhm.
please no, I'm not victim blaming, but there's people listening who, you know, are in the throes of raising kids. And it's funny how mothers will do anything other than lead by example. They'll do
Yeah.
anything. Oh, you need me to pay money for camp. Oh, you need me
Right.
to
Oh,
this. You need
let's
me
get
to
you in
run you
another
here.
activity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you need me to be calm and stable so you can see the difference in, you know, maybe a high conflict parent and a stable parent.
hmm
I'll do anything other than that, Sarah. I don't want to work on myself, but you tell me how to help my kids. Anything other than helping myself. Anything. And it's just like, what?
Yeah.
What? What?
Yeah.
What? You know, I see it over and over again. It's like, gosh, they will cut off an arm to send their kid to space camp, but
Right.
not.
But not, put any time or very little money into nurturing and caring for oneself. And that has to be, I mean, in my book, the tagline or the subtitle is 5 Ways to Reclaim Your Superpower and Thrive as a Mom. And number one is that you have to put yourself first. There's, we think there's, so many people that think, oh, a good mom always puts her kids' needs first. And you're like this sacrificial person. And what happens is you become depleted, resentful, and exhausted. And that's the perfect recipe for being a reactive mom. And I was there. And I'm still reclaiming my superpower in that regard. But my kids have learned, they even say things like, Mom, go take a bath. You need to relax. Like, go take a walk, go for a hike, because they can see me escalating and they don't want their mom to go back to being that that mom
Yeah.
again and again.
Well,
I know there's young parents of young kids that are saying, but Gina, I can't catch a break. Like these kids there's nap time, and during nap time, that's my time to get stuff done. And when do I ever rest? And it is basic survival. You have to plan that time in, and it's so tempting to jump on the computer and get your housework done when they're napping. But I didn't listen to my own mother, and she raised 10 children. I didn't listen to her when she said to me, when the baby rests, you rest too. I was like, when the baby rests, that's when you get stuff done. Like, I just put her generation of moms in a category of, you were weak. Like in the 60s and 70s, you were just house moms, and you don't understand what it's like to be a mom in the modern day. And now I see her wisdom, and I wish that I hadn't emptied myself, because it wasn't healthy for me.
well, and I think leading children by example is the most sacrificial thing you can do for your kids. You know, if you're trying to put your kids first,
Mhm.
show them how to be a mother, right? And
Mhm.
I think about my own daughter, and it's like, at what point does she expire? Right now, I'm paying for private cheer stuff and this. I mean, doing all these things for her, planning trips to Kentucky so she can compete and da da da. You know, I'm planning all these things for her. At what point does she expire and not matter anymore? Is it when she gets married or when she has kids? But at some point, our modern world of parenting says you expire. And now your job is to be tired, reactive, cranky, sacrificial. And some when you say it that way, when you think about, okay, I'm telling my daughter, you're only important until you're 23. And after that, you're not important for the rest of your life.
Mhm.
Something's very off with that line of reasoning. So, even in the conversation about being sacrificial parents, it's like, okay, you want to sacrifice for your kids? Have the type of adult life you want your kids to have, and show them that's normal. A peaceful house is normal. A loving relationship is normal. Emotional health is normal. Taking rest is normal. Great. You want to sacrifice for your kids? Do that. Have
Mhm.
at it. Your kids will thank you for it.
Yes.
right?
Yeah. And I will say in the beginning, there will be a lot of pushback. And that's what I did not realize when I started saying, no, I'm going to take a bath instead of, engage with what you're doing. They would pound on the door and they, vie for my attention. And I just had to roll through that phase and say, I'm doing what's best for me right now. And eventually that passed. But it's like anytime you're trying to shift a habit or make a change, it's almost like the cage rattles like that old you. And in my case, it was my kids saying, hey, mom, look at me. I'm over here. You forgot. And it's like, no, I didn't forget, but you've got this and you can do this. And that's the greatest service. I mean, we're raising adults. So like we have to remember that from the moment they cut that umbilical cord, it's a process of just continually letting go, letting go, letting go.
Gina, this has been so good and you are so wise. And if you guys want more for Gina and more on the conversation around the older teen and that trouble, we're definitely going to have Gina back on for a part 2 of this conversation. And please, if you can hear me say, this is not about blaming you if you have an older adult child. But there are different people at different stages listening to this conversation, and we're trying to do the best we can to be kind to everyone. But Gina, tell people first where they can find more about your book and then more about everything else you do.
Yeah. Okay. The book is You Are a Supermom, and it is available on Amazon. I'm proud to say it hit #1 in the single parenting category on launch day, which was in September of 2021.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, that was really a big deal. And I mean, it's not just for single parents, it's for all parents. And I've even had a great grandma that read my book and she just said, oh, this is so good. And I'm using it with my grandchildren right now. And I've even had people who don't have kids that have found value in it. And I have a club called the Supermom Club. My background is in fitness. So the idea is short snippets of, I call them 1-minute wellness solutions. But one thing we do is we get up at 6:30 in the morning and we do 10 minutes of movement or meditation just to get our days started. And it's all online. And, it's to help power us up, because how we start our day is how the rest of the day goes. And so it's setting a tone of you matter and you are important, mom, because you are. And the greatest thing the greatest act of love is to love yourself.
Gina, thank you so much. We are so excited. This is just the start of our conversation and not the end. So thank you for helping us on our journey to becoming toxic person proof.